This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Doug Smith. It is 1 o'clock, time for our Monday through Thursday, 1 p.m. podcast. And wow, is there a whole lot going on? And we've got really great news. But first, I wanted to finish up on what we've been talking about all week. And I encourage you, go back and listen to the podcast, one right after the other. They're short, they're brief. And you'll see that we started talking about gun in 1963. And what Gunn was looking at in 1963 is that after 2 days of opioid withdrawal, the adrenal glands were depleted in mice. They were just empty. And he did this by weight. He just took them out and weighed them. Took a lot of took a lot of mice, but he sacrificed them, took out the adrenal glands and weighed them. And that's how he was able to say, hey, after 2 days of opioid withdrawal, the adrenal glands are depleted. Um, and then that was in 1963. And then lo and behold, here comes Akira Brody in 1967 and goes, yeah, not only that, but their bladder's full of metabolites of adrenaline. Okay, so the question is, if the adrenal glands are empty, what happened to the adrenaline? Okay, that's the question. That's the scientific question back in 1963, in the 1960s. If the adrenal glands are empty, what happened to the adrenaline? And whereas Gunn showed that the adrenal glands were empty, it was Akira Brody that came back and said, yeah, not only are the adrenal glands empty, but the urine is full of the metabolites of adrenaline. Now, what that means is it means that the adrenal glands secreted their adrenaline. It was secreted into the bloodstream. It did its thing. Adrenaline, I think we all know what adrenaline does. And it was metabolized, broken down by the body, and excreted by the kidneys into the urine. Okay, so now we know what happened to the adrenaline. It was secreted into the bloodstream. Okay, and that was the 1960s. And the whole point is, hey, there's nobody running around talking about some brain disease. There's nobody running around talking about some dopamine theory of addiction. Okay, that stuff didn't exist. Okay, the what the body of knowledge, what the body of science was looking at was not really sure what's going on in opioid withdrawal, but it involves a depletion of the adrenal glands. Okay, so the point is, this whole thing about you having a brain disease, this whole thing about this being a mental health disorder, this whole thing about you need counseling and you need rehab and you need to be put into rehab, that was all made up. It didn't come from the science. And that's the important point, was it didn't come from the science. Okay, now let's look at what did come from the science. Okay, and what we're looking at today, you're looking at it on the screen right now. This is the all important 1990 Delle study. Okay, Delle wanted to know what in the heck is going on with the adrenal glands. Delle had a hunch that it was not so much related to the adrenal glands, but it was related to the nerves controlling the adrenal glands. And so what Delle did was he built a little operating room for little tiny mice, and he put the little tiny mice to sleep, and he cut open their bellies, and he hooked up hooked up wires on their nerves so he could measure the nerve activity. And then he put them into, these were opioid dependent mice. He'd fed them morphine long enough to be dependent. And then once he had everything hooked up, he gave him a little Narcan to immediately put him into withdrawal. And as soon as the little mouse went into withdrawal, wha-bam, it was obvious. As soon as the little mouse went into withdrawal, the nerve controlling the adrenal gland, it's called the sympathetic nerve, the nerve controlling the adrenal gland surged by 400%. The little nerve went haywire. The little nerve lost control. And Delle was ready. Delle was smart. He was ready. He already had a catheter in the vein so he could draw blood. And so as soon as the little nerve controlling the adrenal gland lost control, boom, Delle pulled blood. And what Delle saw was there was an immediate 20-fold surge in epinephrine. We have our answer. We had our answer back in 1990, folks. As soon as the little mouse went into opioid withdrawal, the little mouse lost control of the nerves controlling the organs. It wasn't just the adrenal glands. Okay, those of you who have been in withdrawal, you know what it's like. You lose control of your sweat glands. You lose control, and you start pouring sweat. You lose control of your mucosal glands, and your eyes start to water, and your nose start to run. You lose control of your heart, and it starts to pound and beat really hard. You lose control of your bowels. Okay, and you also lose control of your adrenal glands. And what Delle showed us was you're not really so much losing control of the organ, you're losing control of the wire going into the organ. And that's why the organs go haywire. Why do you go haywire when you go into withdrawal? Because the nerves went haywire. Well, it makes sense because the opioid receptor is a nerve receptor. Okay, we now know the genetic damage is to the gene that for the opioid receptor. We now know the genetic damage is to a gene called the OPRM1 gene. Don't get lost in the science, people. OPRM1 stands for opioid mu receptor 1. It's just the opioid receptor. So if the opioid receptor is tasked with controlling the nerves, and you got a genetically damaged opioid receptor, well, we can't control the nerves. Why it gets better when you take an opioid? Absolutely clueless. Why it gets better when you take an opioid? No idea. Okay, why the symptoms are bad when you don't take an opioid? No idea. Okay, why it gets better with buprenorphine? No idea. Okay, those are still questions to be answered, but at least now we're asking the right questions. Okay, and we're not telling people they need to go into a rehab program. Total waste of money. Okay, we're not telling people they need counseling. Total waste of money. Sorry, but rehab programs and counseling don't do anything for genetic damage. Okay, they don't do anything for genetic damage, and that's what our people have is genetic damage. The opioid receptor is the target of the damage, and the opioid receptor is obviously not able to do its job and maintain balance, control, and homeostasis within the nervous system itself, and that's what's going on. So here we are in the 1990s. Okay, we got here by looking at Gunn in 1963, Akira Brody in 1968, and now Delle in 1990. And we got a really good understanding of what's going on. Okay, here in 1990, we've got a really good understanding of what's going on. And it's not, and we don't have a shred of evidence, not a shred of evidence for something called, the brain disease model of addiction. And so the whole point is, we're going to end with this week. Okay, this is our last podcast for the week. The whole point of this is, and I want to make sure you understand this. When these psychiatrists, okay, Dr. Alan Leshner and Dr. Nora Volkow, when these psychiatrists came up with this dopamine theory of addiction, with this brain disease model of addiction, let's make it very clear. In order to come up with that theory, in order to believe in that theory, you have to ignore the study by Gunn in 1963. You have to ignore the study by Akira Brody in 1968. You have to ignore the study by Delle in 1990. There's other studies you have to ignore. You have to ignore the Chang study from 1990. You have to ignore the Keimbaum study from 1998. You have to ignore the Shorbov study, the Nielsen study, Walkman studies, Sandoval Sierra studies. The amount of science you have to ignore in order to believe in the brain disease model of addiction is mind-boggling. And as we pointed out, there is no science supporting the brain disease model of addiction. Okay, the brain disease model of addiction says that, well, when you took an opioid, you got a surge in dopamine in the brain. Yeah, well, we looked at two studies, Douglas from 2009 and Watson from 2014. And these were studies done, very well done studies, done with a PET scan, positron emission tomography. These were studies done with a very sensitive and specific type of research tool. And when humans were given an opioid, there was no surge in dopamine. Do you realize the house of cards that these psychiatrists are standing upon? The whole thing falls apart under the light of day. Everybody that told you that you were an opioid addict, there's no scientific evidence for that. In fact, they're ignoring massive amounts of scientific evidence just so they can tell you that you're a drug addict. Why do they want to do that? What's their motivation? Why do they want to tell you you're a drug addict when you're not? Why do they want to tell you you're an opioid addict when they're not? What is their motivation? This is dishonesty. What is their motivation? Okay, you go to court and you're accused of a crime. One of the things they're going to want to know is, what was the motivation? Okay, what they've done to you is dishonest. I personally think it's a crime, but I'll stay out. That's my personal opinion. But what was their motivation? What were they after? And I think it's all pretty obvious. They wanted fame and money. They wanted fame and money, and the only way they can get the fame and money is for you to be an opioid addict. Now they can make a whole lot of money by putting you in rehab, giving you counseling, posing as the experts, and they get a whole lot of fame for being the experts, and they get money, and they wear fancy clothes and buy fancy cars and live in fancy houses based upon the lie that you are an opioid addict. My name is Dr. Doug Smith. I apologize for going long today. Obviously, this is something I care greatly about. Please like and subscribe us. Put this podcast on your social media, everybody else's social media. We're making huge strides forward. Stay with us. If you're not getting our email, if you're not getting my email, I email 1 to 3 times a week. I only got one out so far this week. Busy week. Please send us your email address. Alex has a little thing that pops up on the website. You can add your email address. And Alex, I need to get a list of all the emails that have been added, so I can make sure that I've added them to our software for the emails. My name is Dr. Doug Smith. I apologize for being a little long today. This concludes everything for the week. Everybody have a great week, and we will see you back here Monday at 1 o'clock. Thank you.